Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to the final science session of the conference. Let's go ahead and get started. We have three more talks this afternoon. So our next speaker will be Dick Erickson. Dick has long been associated with Western field ornithologists, having become a charter member when in high school, serving 21 years on the California Bird Records Committee, and authoring and editing more than 20 Western birds or studies of Western birds publications, as well as Rare Birds of California. Dick's focus has shifted south, and he now enjoys collaborating with Mexican biologists in the study of birds of the Baja California Peninsula. And today, Dick will speak with us on the 50 biggest changes in California bird distribution over the last 50 years, study plan and preliminary results. So thanks for being here, Dick.
We all good?
Yes.
All right, thanks, Steve. While entering eBird notes for the 1970s recently, and referencing old North American birds or then American birds reports, I was struck by many differences with the way things are today. That was the impetus for this talk. And given the time frame, it seemed appropriate that this should be something of a commemoration of WFO's first 50 years. All right, we have a pretty good overview of the way things stood in the 1970s. Based on these two books published in 1979 and 1981, respectively, and written by WFO stalwarts. These are the major sources of information that we plan to use. Again, this is a preliminary, and most of these we haven't even tapped. If you see things missing here, we'd certainly appreciate hearing about it. There's going to be a few slides like this where I'm going to not say much, and you're going to really study. We did, however, in keeping with the WFO theme, consult a couple of the monographs in the Studies of Western Birds series, the Bird Species of Special Concern, and the Trends and Traditions monograph, as well as the Rare Birds of California. In order to quantify our findings, we developed a scoring system shown here. For the time being, we've weighted population changes double those of range changes. For these range changes, the percentages shown are percentages of the entire state, not just the percentages of a species range. To get a better handle on these changes in range, we hope to develop a map of California with 100 polygons of approximately the same size, not these which are shaped so oddly. We're still working on that. Changes in the ocean will be even more difficult. For the time being, we just sort of looked at changes in latitude. We cast a pretty wide net. Initially, we've reviewed about more than 250 species where we thought there were changes shown either in the positive or negative direction. But we quickly eliminated these 32 CBRC review species because they would never really have enough, the numbers of birds involved would never be nearly enough to reach our final 50. And you get bonus points if you can identify the 4 species listed here that never were CBRC review species. And a hint, they're all in the right column. And one other thing, I know this is a CBRC loving crowd, eager for me to get on with this. But for anyone still believing that rare birds are of little or no biological value, I will note that 2 of the species that will almost certainly be on our final 50 were unrecorded in 1970, went through the entire CBRC review process. And those are, of course, the neotropic cormorant and the barred owl. Next, we'll run through a number of slides showing our initial scoring for species, excuse me, that we believe have increased. And we'll take some time here on each slide, well, 15 or 20 seconds anyway, for you to check on your favorite species, because we really do hope to hear from some of you what you have in mind. The columns should be fairly obvious here. The species in bold are those that have scored the highest in our initial efforts. And there's about more than 60 of those now, so we'll obviously have to whittle that down. And there will certainly be changes in these lists as we actually go into all those sources we showed earlier. But these are our preliminary scores. And one last thing, there there's probably a bit of a Southern California bias in this initial scoring because I've been here for the last 30 years, but Steve will counterbalance that when he weighs in fully. So those long silences I mentioned. I'm not sure if it's the same for everybody else, but I actually can't see the right column. So I hope that's not the case, but I'm afraid it probably is.
Is the right column the total?
Yes. On my screen, I can't see them at all. They're hidden behind you and me and Steve.
We can see the total.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We have the non-native species at the end here. We note that the Eurasian collared dove was the only species that got a perfect score in our analysis initially. Next, we move on to those species we've targeted as declining. Same idea in reverse. The greater the number, the worse the situation. Or the lower the number, negative number anyway. We're pretty happy with the initial scoring, but there will be changes, as I said, and we're not above putting our hand on the scale to show things in the way we wish eventually, but and we may indeed tweak the scoring altogether as we move forward. Again, the non-native species bringing up the rear here. All right, the next 9 slides, we've taken only those species shown in bold, the highest and lowest scoring species, and grouped them in various categories for contemplation. Those with an asterisk are the highest of the high and the lowest of the low scores, the 65th percentile for increased species and the 55th percentile for decreased species. Note in contrast here the difference between migratory water birds and resident water birds. On this slide, I count 70s in American birds from Northern California in 1971. There was this: two goshawks were reported in late July, both from the Central Sierra Nevada. The only other accipiter report was of 2 separate Cooper's hawks in the lower elevations of the Sierra Nevada. And from Southern California in 1977, at least 10 peregrine falcons were reported, indicating that a few still winter in the region. Only 6 merlins were reported. This species is much more scarce today than a decade ago. Here's kind of a hodgepodge of species. Some on the left have adapted to suburban environments, including the nest box beneficiaries like the swallow and the bluebird here, and a fire beneficiary, at least in the short term, the lazuli bunting. Some winners in our world today. And then a couple of bummer slides here, grassland species. and a group of shrub steppe species. And the final category again is non-native species. So in conclusion, we offer a few of our initial thoughts from this process. As I said, we're actually reasonably pleased with the way the scoring has gone, but we will certainly tweak things. And I'll just read through these. Combining and assessing information that may, I can't see my screens. Can I get back to, if I go delete, will I be able to read everything? I mean, sorry, escape. Jennifer?
I'm sorry, what are you trying to do?
I can't read my screen and I need to do that because it's hidden behind you and Steve again and me on the right side. Escape?
No, you can grab, you see the window that has you talking in it? Is that what's in the window? There's a black bar at the top of it. If you click on it and drag it, you can move it anywhere on the screen. So it's not in your way.
There you go. Okay, so combining and assessing information that may be contradictory on different types of birds from different regions of the state, different habitats, different sized study areas, and different sources will be challenging, but will ultimately be the real benefit of this study, in our opinion. We may yet do more to consider subspecies and subspecies groups in different seasonal roles, but we have not done that yet. Positive changes in numbers and distribution are easier to detect than negative changes. The average score of the increased species was 5.3 with a range of 2 to 10, whereas the declined species average was -4.0 with a range of -2 to -7. Waterbird numbers are generally easier to assess and visualize for analysis than our landbird numbers. We hope to obtain accurate and current information on habitat distribution and loss from which to better extrapolate bird numbers and trends, consider in particular the wildfires that we've suffered through the last few years and what sort of effects those are going to have on habitat is unimaginable yet. Some species have undergone population increases and decreases within our study period, with a few examples listed here. Non-native species continue to be well represented in the state's avifauna, despite some now being in the latter stages of the boom and bust cycle that is typical of many species with rapidly expanding ranges. And conservation efforts do matter, for example, for raptors, non-native predator control on islands, the placement of nest boxes, habitat restoration for wetlands, riparian, coastal sage scrub, and other habitats sure to come. And we point out the problems, problems with grassland and shrub steppe species again. And with that, we'll take any questions you may have.
Thanks a lot, Dick. And just to reiterate, I think the main purpose here was to indicate preliminary results and solicit ideas and input from others. And there are certainly many in the audience that will be approaching and asking for input from. But if there are any initial ideas or thoughts right now, we have a few minutes to talk about those. Dick, there is one question. Is it believed that the Eurasian collared doves are overcoming habitats of mourning doves since they're increasing as mourning doves are decreasing? Or is that just coincidence?
There are habitat differences, I think, but I suspect mourning doves have suffered at the fate of at the hands of collared doves, if that's the question. I
think it is, yeah. And then someone asked simply house finch ? I think they're
okay. Yes, one of the great papers in the Trends and Traditions monograph was by Ed Pandolfino and Handel, and they found statistical differences for quite a few species based on Christmas bird count data in the Central Valley. Any species like that where they showed declines or increases automatically got placement on our initial scoring. So the house finch in particular is one that came straight out of there. In time, I suspect that might not hold up, but that's why it's there is in particular Ed's work, and he's done a lot of good stuff. We're going to refer to a lot more things, publications of his. And I also wanted to point out a couple of his conclusions from that paper in terms of restoration, the benefits of that, as well as the risks to grassland, open land species were well identified by him previously.
All right, and how has accelerating climate change affected species trends, and in particular, new species in California?
Probably in quite a big way. That's still unfolding. Something like the neotropic cormorant, presumably is a response to climate change. Again, with my perspective here in Southern California, I look at a lot of species that seem to be retracting northward, things that used to winter farther south, northern shrike, rough-legged hawk, that sort of thing. I'm sure that there is a tremendous effect of climate change.
Let's see, can you figure out changes in distribution ranges from your data?
Our data is summarizing others' data, where this is that certainly, well, as our initial review is basically kind of seat of the pants. Well, we've been paying attention for a few decades, but basically, you know, what's not here anymore that used to be. There's a lot of range changes. As I mentioned, we want to come up with this state map with 100 polygons, which will really assist in that. And eBird data and all those other sources we mentioned initially, early on, will be helpful in really nailing down distribution change or range changes.
All right, there's a comment here that Paul Lehman thinks collared doves, this is John Dunn saying Paul Lehman thinks collared doves are declining, but not in Inyo. There's a question, have white eyes affected bush tit abundance?
I can't answer that one. That'd be interesting. There's sure a lot of them down here now.
Question, what other states or regions have done reviews such as this?
I'm not aware of anything quite comparable. I suspect somebody has. I'm not aware of it. If anyone knows, I would like to hear.
Mm-hmm. All right, so that's the end of the questions. And Dick, thank you so much for doing this. I know there's still a lot of work that we have to do, but you have done the lion's share of this so far. So
I see one more question.
Really interesting study.
Okay, very good. And we will have access to these comments in the chat eventually, you and I?
Yes, I've been taking notes.
Very good. Well, thank you all.
All right, thank you. Thanks a lot, Dick. Our next speaker is JUSTYN STAHL. JUSTYN is chair of the California Bird Records Committee, serving his second term as a member. JUSTYN works as a wildlife biologist for the Institute for Wildlife Studies as the project manager for the San Clemente Loggerhead Shrike Monitoring and Release Project on San Clemente Island in California. And today, JUSTYN will provide us with an update on California Bird Records Committee news. So thanks for being here, JUSTYN.
Thank you. Audio working okay?
Audio is fine.
All right. Thank you all for coming. Hopefully someone finds something like a common cuckoo and we can all rush out of this update, as I think happened for Kimball a few years ago. Right now it's raining in San Diego, so maybe there's frigate birds coming in with Hurricane Ida. Today I'm going to talk about the last 2 years of things the CBRC has been up to since the last update at the 2019 meeting. And sort of an overview of what I'm going to talk about is the 3 reports we've published in Western Birds, 4 additions to the state list, quickly flip through a few notable records that were recently voted on or are currently in circulation, go over the review list and some of the additions and removals, some of which have been foretold by Dick's talk you just listened to about some of these species that are increasing or decreasing in occurrence, and then provide a brief update on the introduced birds subcommittee watch list, and that these are introduced species that may someday soon be added to the California state list. Oops. Okay, since August 2019, since the last WFO meeting, the CBRC has published.
JUSTYN, sorry to interrupt. Yep. We can't see your screen. If you're sharing your screen, we can only see you.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. I had it full screen. Let me jump back into the meeting. Share screen. How is this?
There we go. We can see it. If you can, there you go.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
So I went over the overview. You'll get all of that again shortly. So since the 2019 meeting, we've been busy publishing the findings of CBRC voting, and we've had 3 reports come out in Western Birds. Shown, the abstracts are shown here. These reports summarize 669 records that were submitted to the committee. 580 of these records were endorsed by the committee. So the last 3 reports have had an acceptance rate of 87%. These reports were published in Western Birds, but they're also available on our website on californiabirds.org. Just navigate to the publications tab, and then there's a drop-down menu where you can see the reports by year. So in the last 2 years, we've had 4 species added to the state list. The total is now 677, and this total includes 13 established exotics. We have added the yellow-browed warbler, Mexican duck, and 2 established exotics were new, the yellow chevron parakeet and the red whiskered bulbul. The yellow-browed warbler is this old world warbler, Phyloscopus inornatus, breeds throughout Russia, southwest China, Mongolia, and then winters into Northeast India and Southeast Asia. It's a regular and increasing vagrant to Western Europe, and especially in the last few years there's been quite an uptick in records there. On our side of the globe, there's I don't know, more than a dozen records, I believe, from Alaska. But south of Alaska, it's limited to a bird in BC in fall of 2019. This spring bird from 2007, which likely wintered in Baja. A site record from that same year in Wisconsin. And then more relevant to today's talk was this bird Todd Easterla found in Markleyville up in Alpine County on October 24th, 2019. As with these old world birds, especially these leaf warblers, there's a lot of confusing conspecific birds to eliminate. The 3 that really stand out as confusing with yellow-browed warbler here is Hume's warbler, which it was formerly considered conspecific with, two-barred warbler, and Pallas's leaf warbler, which has occurred in Alaska. The bold wing bars, concolorous rump with the back, and this, it doesn't show well in this photo, but there's an indistinct crown stripe. Those eliminate all but these species: Hume's warbler, two-barred warbler, and Pallas's leaf warbler. Hume's can be eliminated by the overall greenish upper parts, the wing bars being more bold, and notably the voice, which I think Todd described as a Pacific slope flycatcher like Tsuit, which really clinched the ID and eliminated Hume's, which is more of this chewy call. And if I had thought to do it, I would have included calls of this. I don't believe the committee received recordings, and I failed to check eBird to see if any of the California bird were uploaded, but the voice, the description of the voice was diagnostic. Two-barred warbler can be eliminated by these the bolder wing bars, and also these white-edged tertials, as well as the wings being sort of black-based. Two-barred warbler has more of a greenish wash, similar to the back. And an interesting side note on this bird, this was the first CBRC review list species to be reported from Alpine County. So places like San Francisco, LA, San Diego, hundreds of records have been generated of rare birds in those counties. But this was the first to come from Alpine County, and it was the last of the California counties to have CBRC level rarity reported in it, if I'm not mistaken. The second species that was added recently was due to a split. The Mexican duck was split by the AOS in 2020 from mallard. David Vanderplein gave a nice talk on this at the meeting in Ventura a few years ago. The CBRC is currently reviewing all records of Mexican duck. So far, we've accepted this record. A lot of these are still in circulation, but we've accepted this record from David from the Colorado River. And in consulting with Andy from UC Davis, he has stressed to the committee the importance of timing in identification. So in the summer, molting and immature mallards can be very confusing, but if you get a bird in winter, November to March, the ID of males is rather straightforward. You're looking for this contrasting neck and breast pattern, this rather dark and unmarked back, and traditionally look for little to, if any, white in the tail. However, genetic studies that Inglis has found show that some of these traits that we currently, or previously considered to be mallard-like traits, like a curled tail, a lot of white in the tail, things like that, they aren't necessarily indicative of hybrids. And genetically pure Mexican ducks can show some variation in these characteristics. So the tail pattern is, it helps, but it's not a deal breaker for identification. So some of the records of that may have been previously considered hybrids could be legitimate Mexican ducks, just on the sort of bright end of the spectrum. The other two birds recently added were exotics that were proposed by the Introduced Birds Subcommittee and approved by the CBRC. The first was the yellow chevron parakeet. This establishment was certainly due to the escape of some of the tens of thousands of yellow chevron parakeets imported between 1977 and 1990 for the pet trade. It's steadily increased since then, and the population is estimated to be over 1,000. Breeding was confirmed in 1997, and it ranges from coastal LA into Orange County. The other exotic that was recently added was the red-whiskered bulbul. This bird was first reported in 1968, quickly established, and as it was viewed as an agricultural pest, an eradication effort was launched between 1968 and 1984. That was abandoned, and the population continued to grow and spread. It's primarily in Pasadena, but these other birds to the south and west may pertain to novel escapees or birds dispersing from this population, which is estimated to be over 500 at this point. But the work never ends, and the CBRC is currently considering a report of a willow warbler from Santa Cruz in October 2020. Brian Ballard photographed this bird at Neary Lagoon. I won't say too much about it because it's currently in circulation, and committee members are not supposed to discuss publicly or amongst each other records currently in their first round of circulation, to allow everyone to have their own opinion, not influenced by anyone else on the committee. But I will say, I'll just point out this bird's range. There's 3 subspecies that are spread throughout the other side of the globe. It's most well known from Northern Europe, wintering down into Africa, and the birds that have shown up in Alaska and potentially this bird would be coming from the eastern subspecies Yakutensis. Some of the public discussion and expert opinion we've solicited has reminded us there are several like yellow-browed warbler. When you start dealing with these Thylacopus warblers, there's a lot of confusing similar birds to consider. And when you put photos of this bird up next to common chiffchaff and dusky warbler, you can see the ID may not be a simple one to make at this point. Other records we've been working on in the last 2 years, this report of a purple sandpiper is currently in circulation. This bird from the north end of the Salton Sea would be a second record for California. A common eider was photographed and accepted off of Monterey in February of 2019. There's an onslaught of common ringed plovers in 2019 and 2020. We had 3 birds, one in Orange, one in Del Norte, and one in San Luis Obispo. These are the 3rd, 4th, and 5th records accepted. Currently in circulation was this backyard report of a Chuck Wills widow from Marin County in December. And the 4th and 5th state records of red flank bluetail came from Southeast Farallon Island. And first bird, I believe, was banded. So when a second unbanded bird showed up, it was easy to know that there was more than one bird involved. And finally, the spotted redshank in Ventura County was the first to be in the state in over 30 years. That was an accepted, well-photographed bird shown here by Larry Sansoni. So the CBRC reviews all species on the review list and any species not currently known from the state of California. In general, these species have occurred less than 4 times per year in the last 10-year window. So over the last decade, less than 40 records, but that's just the sort of rule of thumb we have in the bylaws that a vote at a meeting can overturn or go along with. And there are currently 199 species on the review list. Getting at some of the stuff that Dick was talking about earlier with just sort of changes to the California avifauna and climate change. One big one was, as the oceans warm and prey base perhaps collapses or shifts around in the ocean, things like Nazca booby and red-footed booby just kind of went off the charts in the last few years. Nazca booby, the 7-year average, there are an average of 8 records per year. And this bird quickly went from a first state record in 2013 to having been removed from the review list at the 2020 meeting, I believe. Red-footed booby, same sort of situation, although it has a longer history in California. Broad-billed hummingbird, just kind of oscillated around 4 records per year. The 10-year average is 3.6, but if you look at the last 5 years, it's nearly 5 records per year. This is a very easy bird to identify. So that has been removed from the review list. And finally, rusty blackbird, which had a relatively short stay on the review list. I believe it was added in 2006 due to a crashing population and throughout the U.S. But in the last 10 years, records have been nearly 6 per year, and that was removed as well. One species I think that may be fairly obvious to birders visiting the Salton Sea in the summer and just throughout Southern California is wood stork. And if you look at the last 5 years, wood stork has declined to basically 1 record per year. And in the last 2 or 3 years, I think it's basically 1. There's been a bird like at the safari park in Escondido in San Diego, and then it shows up at Lake Elsinore and around Riverside County. But this is a bird that's gone way downhill, and we voted to add this to the review list just to carefully track, the true status of this bird in the state going forward. And then moving on to, sort of potential changes coming with introduced species. The California Bird Records Committee maintains a watch list that the Introduced Birds Subcommittee puts together. And this was last updated November 2019. You can find this online at californiabirds.org/watchlist. And there you'll find status and distribution summaries for a number of established naturalized species that are not yet on the state list. Most are breeding and have populations over 100, but they do not meet all the criteria to be accepted to the state list currently, or we're just missing the data. That's where you can come in by keeping track of these birds. So 4 that we're looking at and maybe added soon. First is mitered parakeet. This bird occurs throughout Los Angeles and Orange County. And there's also a small population in Santa Clara County where it's known to breed as well. Roosts in Southern California, at least, the total number of birds seen at roosts is over 1,000. It's been breeding since the 80s, and this was confirmed during the LA Bird Breeding Atlas period in the 90s. Coincidentally, this is a bird that was recently added to the ABA checklist based on a population in Florida, but my understanding is the population in California exceeds that of Florida, so it would make sense for this bird to be added to the state list as well, and that's something that's probably on the agenda for our next meeting in January. Congener to the mitered parakeet is the red-masked parakeet. This is one I'm more familiar with down here in San Diego. And you may be familiar with it from the Wild Parrots of Telegraph Hill documentary about the birds up in San Francisco. There are several small populations, scattered throughout these three parts of the state. And that's all I really have to say about that. It's given the status of this bird, it's likely, it has a high likelihood of being added in the future as well. One difficult thing with these two species, with mitered and red-masked parakeet, is just similarities in appearance make ascertaining exact counts of these two populations a little more difficult. A very easy to identify bird, the named-day parakeet, is well established, in my opinion, along the Santa Monica Mountains up in LA and creeping into Ventura County. This bird, the population is estimated between 300 and 500, and it's been breeding in the sycamores in the canyons of the Santa Monica Mountains since 1991, and it's slowly been increasing westward into Ventura, and maybe a bird soon added to the state list. Finally, another parrot, lilac-crowned parrot. This bird has an estimated population between 600 and 900. It's been increasing since it, don't know what my notes say there, but since the 70s, probably when it was first recorded. Some ID issues here as well, and hybridization with red-crowned parrot. It's spread throughout the San Gabriel, Pomona Valley, San Bernardino Valley, Central Orange County, and down here in coastal San Diego. So thanks for paying attention to what's been going on with the CBRC lately. If you want to support us, the best thing you can do is directly submit documentation of rare birds, either by email to Tom Benson, the secretary, at secretary@californiabirds.org, or if you go onto our website, there's a link to report your documentation there. And this doesn't apply only to California. Any state that you're visiting or you may be living and logging in from, it's important to directly document these birds and send it to bird records committees. Tom has some alerts he's subscribed to on eBird to try to get information from eBird on CBRC review list species, but oftentimes these records are incomplete, or if they're submitted more than 7 days after the observation, they don't actually generate an alert. So they may be in the database, but then we have to go in and fish them out. And it's just much easier for us if people submit directly to the committee. And finally, I'd just like to say that this work couldn't be done without all of these people and many more not listed. Hundreds of people submit documentation to us, and here's just a little screenshot from one of our reports. We'd like to thank everybody by name that has submitted documentation. All this work has been done by current and past committee members, many of which are here as attendees as well. A big thanks to people that have donated money to help us offset page charges. Putting out a 30-page plus CBRC report is made much easier by people donating money. Big shout out to Susan Carota, longtime WFO treasurer and thereby the CBRC treasurer. Phil Unit has done a marvelous job getting everything in line before publication in Western Birds. And all these online resources I've referenced throughout this talk wouldn't be possible without Joe Moreland's tireless work keeping the website up to date. And with that, I will take any questions if time remains.
All right, thanks a lot, Justin. We do have one comment. The calls of Humes and yellow-browed warbler are not that different, and with apparently no recordings, ...
Mm-hmm.
So I guess this person is suggesting that, or asking, how does the committee think that's an acceptable yellow-browed warbler? I'm inferring that's what they're getting at.
Yeah, I'd have to defer to somebody that was on the committee during that stretch. I didn't actually vote on that record, but listening to the calls leading up to this discussion and looking at the spectrograms, it seemed they were different enough. My understanding is there are recordings. I don't know if those were made available to the committee or not.
Gotcha. And somebody in the chat said that it appears that there was nothing, there was no audio that was reported to Macaulay or Zeno Canto for that bird. But there is for the yellow-browed warbler from southern British Columbia and one from Bermuda.
Okay, great.
All right, and without any more questions, sorry to put you on the spot. Aside from introduced birds or birds that the committee is currently considering, like willow warbler, what's a species that you think will be added to the state list in the next 10 years?
Well, you know, things like Swainson's warbler and Kirtland's warbler, the ones that everybody always hopes to find and worries about it being at a place like, you know, China Ranch, which just couldn't couldn't support 100 people showing up all at the same time. But with, you know, changing seas, it could easily be, you know, seabirds coming up from the south. You know, it's like, how did well, speaking of the hurricane, how did Arizona get Juan Fernandez petrel, you know, flying over Brian Gibbons' yard before a place like California, which has, you know, almost weekly pelagic trips? So
Yep.
One of those two would be my guess. But as Phil Unit said, it's always something not on the list.
That's right. All right, Justin, thanks a lot.
Yeah, no problem.
Really
Thank you.
appreciate it. All right. And so rounding out the science sessions presentations will be Bryce Robinson. As a result of some bad weather, we had some technical difficulties with Bryce's talk on Friday, but we didn't want to miss it. So Bryce is back. Bryce is an ornithologist and illustrator who has studied birds across North and Central America, and he's working toward a PhD at Cornell University in the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So Bryce will be speaking about red nuchal markings and red-shafted northern flickers. Welcome, Bryce.
Thanks, Steve. Should get my screen share going. I apologize for the problems the other night or the other day. Hopefully it'll go smoothly this time. So I'm gonna just share some some things I'm looking into. This is all, I would say, incomplete and ongoing. So just keeping that in mind. But I thought you'd all be interested in seeing what I've come up with so far, looking into nuchal markings, the prevalence of nuchal markings in red-shafted northern flicker. So to begin, I think it's important to just give an overview of the biogeography of the northern flicker in North America. For the purpose of this talk, we're just going to focus on northern flicker distribution in North America, sans Mexico and the Caribbean. And in that area, there are two subspecies groups of northern flicker. The nominate in the east is auratus, also called yellow-shafted flicker because of the coloration of the flight feathers. And in the west is coffer, also called red-shafted because of the coloration of its flight feathers. And where these two populations come into contact, basically along the continental divide, they freely interbreed and produce a wide variety of hybrid individuals. And I think it's also important to go over the identification of each taxa, or each taxon, and also give some examples of how to identify an integrate or hybrid individual. So the yellow shafted or Aratus, as individuals have a prominent red nuchal crescent, that's that red in the nape. They have gray crowns and nice rosy tan cheeks and throat. Males have a black malar stripe, and then of course they have the yellow flight feathers that give them their name. Red shafted or coffer, generally the nuchal crescent is absent in this group. They also have a brown tawny crown. The cheeks are gray and the throat is also gray. And then the males have a bright red malar. And of course they have the red flight feathers that they get their name from. Hybrid individuals are quite variable, but can be identified by a combination of traits from the parental types. And those include, often red nuchal crescent. The crown color can be one of the colors of the parental types, but often a mixture. The same goes for the cheeks and the throat, but often a mixture. And then the red or the malar is generally a mixture of red and black in these individuals, and that's often the most the trait that stands out the most. And then generally, the flight feather coloration can be one of the parental types, but also often is a mixture, being yellow, orange in coloration. So early in my birding career in the West, I noticed individuals that were otherwise red-shafted flickers that had some red in the nape, and I asked people about that, a few individuals, and was told that they too noticed that, and that it's just something that occurs at relatively low frequency in red-shafted flicker. And I also believe it is in the literature, in the pile guide, I think it's mentioned that some individuals can have red in the nape. Later, as an eBird reviewer for a couple of counties in southwestern Idaho, I ran into a few not a few instances, I continually ran into instances where eBird users were inputting photos of these individuals as intergrades between Aratus and Kaffir. And the way I treated that was to ask those folks not to put that label on these individuals, just put them in as northern flicker, because of my personal experience noticing these birds during the breeding season in the core distribution of Kaffir. Understandably, I got some pushback on that from a lot of individuals, and my only response was all based on personal observation. So I thought that I'd look into putting some data behind this. And so I decided to source photos in the Macaulay Library to look at the prevalence of this trait in red-shafted flickers. So what I did is I looked at photos in 7 states that are within the distribution of Kaffir. I did not include those states that contain any of the contact zone. So I only looked at 7 states. And I also only looked at photos from the breeding season. This is from 1st of May to 31st of July. That's just a rough bin. It's, of course, the breeding season is different from that, but I just chose this rough bin. And I think it's also important to note that I only looked at photos until 2020. I haven't looked at 2021 photos yet, but I do plan to. So from this photo pool, I recorded individuals with any amount of red in the nape. I want to walk you through how I went through this so that if anybody isn't familiar with Macaulay Library, they can see how I did this, and they can go in and do this. You can do this yourself and see if you agree with the birds I found and how we should treat these. So this is the home page, and you put in the species name, and I selected northern flicker, not any subspecies, just northern flicker. And that popped out at the time, just over 109,000 photos. as you can see here. And I then applied the location filter. And, I did this one state at a time. So, for instance, starting with Washington and only looking at photos from Washington, which filtered the photos down to just over 4,000 photos. I then applied the date filter in that May to July bin. So this is 1st of May to 31st of July. And that whittled it down to 998 photos. And from this photo pool for Washington, I then went through all the photos and recorded individuals that had any amount of red in the nape. Doing this, I noticed that the number of photos wasn't representative of the number of individuals, and that is shown in these two photos here in two different ways, where in one photo in this there are 3 different individuals. And there are also many instances where there are multiple photos, repeated photos of one individual. So after I recorded all the individuals that had red in the nape, I went through and did my best to record how many individuals were represented in the photo pool for a particular state. And so in the 2,900, just over 2,900 photos that I looked at, that they actually represented around 2,300 individuals. I also thought it was important to try and quantify the abundance or try and characterize the nuchal crescent, the extent of the nuchal crescent in these individuals. So I scored the nuchal patch for all the individuals that I found. And I'll just go through and show you some of an example of each of these scores. So this bird just has a little bit of flecking in the nape. So I would score this as a 1. This individual has a flecking, but it's starting to form a little bit of a line on both sides, a little bit more extensive. So that's a 2. This juvenile is being fed here has a more prominent line, although it's thin. So I scored these individuals as a 3. And so this individual, it has that, line out, but it's becoming more thicker and more extensive. So that individual I would score as a 4. And then any individual that had quite an extensive and prominent nuchal crescent that, at times was almost or as extensive as you'd find in a radius, I score as a 5. And this is what I found. So all of these dots, of course, are individuals throughout the distribution in the 7 states that I looked at. I found 119 individuals, which is 5% of all of the individuals that were in that photo pool. And then here are the numbers for the percentages for each nuchal score. And they actually, it's interesting, they follow a normal distribution where most of the individuals had a nuchal score from in the 2 to 4 range, the most being 3s. I found that interesting. Other interesting results were that I did not find any yellow-shafted flickers in this photo pool during this time. Of course, that makes sense. This is outside of the distribution, the breeding distribution of yellow-shafted flicker, so they aren't to be expected. But that points to the relatively infrequent occurrence of yellow-shafted flickers breeding in this region, and a lack of hybridization events. I think it's also important to note that I did find 6 birds that I would consider good intergrades, meaning that they had a mixture of red-shafted and yellow-shafted traits. But these 6 individuals only represent 0.3% of all of the individuals that I looked at. Another thing I want to note is that there are multiple photos that had that documented juveniles or nestlings that either were in the nest cavity or being fed by the parents. The juvenile had a nuchal crescent, and in some cases, both parents were represented, and either they looked like good red-shafted flickers, or some instances where one of the parents had a nuchal crescent as well, but just also something to consider. So in thinking about these traits and what we can and using or inputting these birds in as hybrids or intergrades, I wanted to, because I'm looking at eBird data and I'm coming at this from an eBird reviewer's perspective. That was kind of the impetus for looking at this. I wanted to share the definitions that eBird has for hybrid and intergrade on their website. And of course, hybrid means hybridization between two species, and they give the example of tundra and trumpeter swan. An intergrade, of course, is a hybrid still between two subspecies or subspecies groups. They give whistling and Buick's swans as examples, but of course we know that Auratus and Kafir are also good examples of that. But these two definitions are open for interpretation of what exactly is an intergrade. And so I'm kind of stuck on this question of at what point do back crosses not count as intergrades? And I'm sure many of you have thought a lot about this. So I'm open to people sharing their ideas or even if there's literature on this. But I suppose one might argue that any individual who has any mixture of traits from one or the other should be counted as an intergrade. But in the case, for instance, if if the red in the nape of red-shafted flickers is a signal of backcrossing or introgression from yellow-shafted flicker, at what point do we stop calling them intergrades? And how confident are we that that trait actually is a signal of introgression, especially if it's 5 to 10 generations back, and especially since we don't actually understand this. So the question is, what does this pattern mean? And I do suspect it's introgression or gene flow from yellow-shafted flicker. That makes the most sense. And there is a slight hint towards that pattern, meaning that the most of the individuals were found in Oregon and Washington, which are close to the contact zone, and they're less frequent when you go in places like Southern California, Nevada, southern areas. We could use genomic tools to investigate this. As some of you might know, a lab mate of mine who just defended her dissertation last spring, she did her dissertation on the genomics of plumage traits from the hybrid zone and did find genomic regions that code for each of the differing color patches, including the nuchal crescent. So that can be that can be used to look into look at those regions and see if we can figure out if this is true introgression from yellow shafted or if this is just underlying genetic material that's always been present in red shafted and isn't necessarily a signal of introgression. Luke DeSico sent along Leslie Short's monograph to me recently, and I actually found it quite insightful and well done. I'm still working through it, but there were some things that I found in it just from a quick read through that I found were interesting. He actually looked into this. The hybridization, the monograph's great, but in this map to the left, the black is areas that he calls areas of introgression. And there are a few interesting things here, but you can see that in the Kafir distribution, it's actually quite extensive, whereas in Auratus, it's not. And that's peculiar, but it also indicates that he thought, or he found that there were signals, or what he took as signals of introgression throughout the Kafir distribution. But he also had some thoughts on the red in the nape, the red nuchal crescent that I thought I'd share. He says it is present in some individuals of all races of the species. What that means, he only speculated, but he did say since it's impossible to separate the effects of introgression from those due to the genetic potential of Kafir itself, a degree of error is incorporated in the use of this character in the color analysis of hybrids, which is essentially, I think what I'm saying is that we really can't say for certain if the red in the nape is a product of introgression, and should those individuals be called intergrades. So the question is it important to stop calling these individuals Auratus Kaffir? And I think my position at the moment, and I'm definitely open to other ideas and discussing this with people, but I think my perspective is that it is important because it washes out the prevalence of true intergrades throughout the distribution of Kaffir. And it also clouds the distribution of the contact zone, or at least it simplifies it. So I think that I would support not inputting these individuals that are otherwise red-shafted flicker but have red in the nape in as intergrades. And with that, I would love to take questions or comments. These are my social media handles, and I would love to get emails from anybody who has thought a lot about this themselves or has any ideas that they'd like to share, or tell me I'm wrong in my perspective. And thank you.
Thanks a lot, Bryce. We really appreciate you coming back and doing this. And so I have a couple questions until others. Oh, there is one here. John Dunn, the Middle American taxon may well be a distinct species. They certainly sound different.
Cool.
So this issue reminds me of the question of the extent of red on the head of red-naped sapsucker. You know, how much red can a red-naped sapsucker have on the side of its head before we say that it's likely a hybrid with red-breasted versus, and you know, we see the whole range, you know, often in the breeding season, and there it's the same or similar type of issue,
yeah.
But there it's between birds that we call two species, so it's
right. And
more struggle.
Is it Daggett that's very red-naped looking and looks a lot like hybrids? Yeah, I mean essentially looking into this from a genomic perspective is how I think we can really tease apart things and understand it fully. And it is difficult, but it also kind of, in thinking about this similar thing in subspecies definitions for red-tailed hawks, in some ways it's not really appropriate to try and place a name to it. So my perspective is that we shouldn't be doing that until we understand it more fully.
Gotcha.
And I would say the same would go for Spirapicus hybrids and subspecies. When there is confusion and we don't know, I would think we should be more conservative.
I think that makes sense. So one of the great things about eBird and the Macaulay Library is that anyone out there watching could have done a study like this. All they have to do is come up with the idea. How many hours would you estimate it took you to go through those photos and to do the analysis of the data?
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish I would track these things. I don't know. I guess I would expect around 40 so far. I've broken it up since I think sometime last winter I started looking through the photos and scoring them.
All right.
Like I've spent time creating the maps and everything, so it's all kind of a wash for me, and I strung it out even across my field season this summer, traveling around capturing red-tailed hawks. So I can't really say. I did want to say something in regards to using Macaulay Library data. It's certainly an incomplete data set, and it's only going to get better, and so using it for this question in particular is only going to be more refined over time. But I think it's also would be it's something that we can use maybe in the beginning and to kind of point in an issue, and then we can either look at museum specimens as well to try and quantify this the rate or the prevalence of this trait, or we can do surveys, which would actually be quite difficult. But yeah, the Macaulay Library is becoming quite a powerful tool for anyone to do these types of things.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks. Question, are you aware of any yellow shafteds without red napes? Could the reverse be happening to the east of the intergrade zone?
It's funny, I was talking to John Garrett the other night about that, and I hadn't looked into that. I hadn't looked at the other side of the spectrum, where short was showing that thinner black line, and trying to characterize how red shafted traits filter out going east. And just talking to John, he very quickly pulled up a few individuals from California, his time reviewing California birds, of otherwise yellow shafted flickers, but with no or reduced red in the nape. And I found that to be equally problematic and confusing, and supporting that it is on the other side of the coin. And then his question was, well, what do we call these birds? And I don't really know. Maybe understanding that lack of a red nape is likely introgression of genetic material from red shafted, but that we probably should list them as yellow shafted if they're mostly yellow shafted. I have no idea.
Mm-hmm. All right, and there are a couple comments in the chat. One from Anderson, California. The person saw many flickers with red nuchal crescents on one part of town, but then the other part of town rarely saw any. And then someone else in Portland, Oregon, that was excited to see a red shafted flicker a few weeks ago with red nuchal markings, but that person's excitement has now dimmed as they understand it happens more often. But
yeah, and especially you know, these birds are breeding. Like, there are many photos in Macaulay Library where they're feeding young, or you know, these birds are definitely breeding.
Mm-hmm.
That is interesting about the difference in the, you know, where that individual's noticing birds with red in the nape or not. You know, and I think that the other thing that just sparked in my mind is that a lot of these people that are putting these hybrids of red shafted in are you know, these birds that are red shafted with the nuchal crescent. A lot of these records come from the winter, and so a lot of them probably are migrants from British Columbia or the contact zone in California or my area in Idaho. But just knowing that there are some individuals that look like that breed throughout the red shafted is the complicated part.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, great. Very eye-opening, and I'm sure I'll pay closer attention to it moving forward. So thanks a lot, Bryce. And just want to thank all the Science Sessions presenters. This has been another fantastic group of speakers. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to what people will present at the conference next year. So John Harris, you want to tell us what's up next, please?
Thank you, Steve. I wanted to mention that Steve is retiring from his role in running and organizing the science sessions this year, and we want to thank him very much for what is a large amount of work and a really important part of our annual conferences. So I hope you all will thank Steve when you run into him out birding. Our next presentation will be a workshop on shorebird identification given by John Dunn and Laura Singh, and that will be at 5 o'clock, so in a little over 20 minutes. Thank you.